Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How you doing, Ken?
Delighted to be here as always. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It is episode 122, and we have got lots of stuff planned for you today. We're going to start off by speaking about the difference between counselling and other helping roles. That's something that comes up again and again and again. We could spend hours on that. Then we're going to be checking in with our good friends at CPCAB. And it's interesting. Today, the check-in with CPCAB is, why do we check in? So that's something for you to look forward to. And we're going to be ending episode 122 by looking at the difference between using counselling skills in class or in a simulated session and the difference that makes when you go out and you practice in placement, or if you're a qualified practitioner and you're practicing with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was speaking to someone the other day and they were saying that they were really surprised when they went into their counselling course, level 2. They were sat with professionals from other disciplines, police officers, nurses, teachers. I've had doctors, I've had psychologists, believe it or not, who did level 2. I had someone with a PhD in psychology did a level 2 because her training was completely different to being a counsellor. And one of the things that we have to do is that we may have a job where we're very, very competent in it and we're at the top of our profession. And then we move into the realm of counselling, and we discover that our skill set needs adjusting a little bit, and you might have to adapt yourself. And one of those big adaptations that a lot of people in traditional helping roles have to come across, that are quite a big hurdle, I think, is that you're not rescuing or you're not offering advice. That is just such a huge difference, and you're allowing the person in front of you to make decisions. And for some, that can be quite a big challenge because they're so used to using interventions and help. And I have to say that teachers find this particularly difficult. From all the people I've taught, teachers seem to find this quite difficult because, of course, they're taught to intervene, to help, to put structures in place, which is all good teaching stuff. But sometimes it can be a tricky hurdle to cross. Just being there for the person in front, just listening, not being directive. And it can be a big challenge for some.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something that comes up again and again in discussions, and it comes up in assignments, is explain the difference between counselling and other helping activities. And you've just kind of hit the nail on the head there, Rory. There is an overlap. You may find somebody that is a teacher using counselling skills. They can go and use those counselling skills. So what's the difference then? This is where it gets tricky. What's the difference between that teacher that is maybe using counselling skills and a counsellor who is counselling and using the exact same skills? And we're asked to write about this and we're asked to think about this for very, very good reason. And the main difference is that somebody using counselling skills, and they are not a counsellor, they are not delivering therapy. It may be that what they say or what they do ends up having a therapeutic outcome, but it is not therapy. Whereas counselling is therapy. When you go to see a counsellor, when somebody comes to see a counsellor, it is a defined relationship in service of that client, where the counsellor will use their training to listen to that client, to go with that client wherever they choose to go. And the whole relationship is there to support and better that client on their journey, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And just listening. And I also think, and I've recently delivered a lecture on listening skills to those who are members of our paid resource, the Counselling Study Resource, a skills masterclass of one of the things we have to, part of that was one of the things we have to consider is that in a lot of our society, we are taught to listen to respond, not listen to understand. In fact, they teach children listening and responding. But, listening and to understand is a completely different discipline. In other words, you're really trying to understand the person in front of you's world as they see it, their frame of reference. And that is something that I think is unusual in our society, and can be a big shift for people who have been taught to listen to respond, I've seen people who've been in classes. I gave an example of a student who was sharing with a peer that she was very frightened because she was driving along and her car got carved up. Someone carved her up or drove in front of her, and the peer responded by saying, "Well, you need to take advanced driving lessons, and then you won't be." And it's like, no, you're missing the whole point here. The thing is that you're trying to get to that person's feelings, not give advice about driving lessons. And it can be tricky because our whole society is predicated on listening to respond, not listening to understand.
100%. Most people, when you're speaking, they're thinking of what they're going to say in reply to what you're saying. As a counsellor, we listen intently, not just to the words that the person is saying. We listen via our eyes. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But we do. We listen via our eyes. What does their body language look like? What facial expressions are they showing us? That the non-verbal communication, just as important. We listen to the music behind the words, I think, as Carl Rogers would put it, Rory, where we're kind of listening for the feelings that underline the narrative, the story. But I mean, if this is of an interesting topic for you and you want to know the difference between counselling and other helping activities, well, we've got a phenomenal free resource on this, and you can find that at counsellingtutor.com, which is our mother website. Go to counsellingtutor.com, and we've got a search bar on that site. Just put in counselling definition and you will see a full article with the definition of counselling and the difference between counselling and other helping activities there. And it also covers some of the boundaries that we follow as counsellors as well. And it also speaks about counselling versus just using counselling skills. So that is for you. It is a free resource. We'll actually put a link maybe in the show notes, and the show notes are easy to find. You just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on podcast tab. It's big and bold. You cannot miss it. Go to episode 122, and that's where you get all the meat. That's where we put all the good stuff. What we speak about here, we write show notes to that. We put links in there. We put resources in there. And Rory, you've even made a phenomenal little handout that people can get for free by going to that very page, counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab, episode 122. And that is a little document on the difference between using skills and the difference between using counselling skills and am I correct in that, Rory?
Yes, I'm going to do a little breakdown on the difference between counselling skills and other helping activities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit. It'll be a brief handout, but it'll just give you a compare and contrast, if you like, of the difference between normal helping roles and maybe what counsellors do. Ideal if you're just starting off in your journey, or if you're partway through it, just to remind you, because sometimes a opportune reminder can be quite useful to kind of keep you on track.
Indeed. So, moving away from the difference between counselling and other helping activities, and we're now going to check in with our good friends at CPCAB, and the topic of the conversation is, why do we check in?
Check in with CPCAB.
So we welcome Ray. How are you doing, Ray?
Hi, Rory. Yeah, I'm doing really well, actually, and it's always good to speak with you. So I'm ready for this morning.
Yes, we recorded this segment in the morning, and
yeah, you can see I'm new to this.
Yes, and also it's kind of highly amusing that we had to do a little bit of what we were doing, what we're going to be talking about, which was checking in.
Yeah, I thought it would be great to talk a little bit about why we check in. When we were looking at coming up with a name for this particular part in the podcast, we thought, let's call it a check-in. And then I began to think about, as a tutor, when I was teaching, I was thinking, well, why do we do check-ins? And there are so many different reasons why a check-in is so important within a counselling course. So the idea, I suppose, for these podcasts, or this segment of the podcast, is that we bring something to your attention. We sort of float it past and say, actually, have you thought about this? This could be really good as a student. This could be good as a tutor, and it fits in really well as the check-in, because a check-in, I suppose, in its translation from meditation Buddhism, means to bring to awareness, or to bring to attention. And I think that's the essence of what I'd like to do. Is I'd just like to float things past you and say, just have a look at this. Tell me what you think about this. It's not prescriptive. It's not, we're an awarding organization. We set criteria, but we don't tell people how to achieve them. They do that by themselves. Well, hopefully with the guidance of a good tutor. So why do we check in? And I think it's this idea of sitting at the beginning of a session, becoming a little bit mindful of what's about to take place. And I think this is a way that we can really begin to prepare ourselves, not only for that session, but if we think about how we prepare ourselves for practice, I think it's great that Carl Rogers used to emphasize this idea of authenticity. And within that is the idea of being self-aware. So this idea of being self-aware, about being aware of how you interact within a relationship, is all. I like the idea that when we become self-aware, we're more in tune with how therapeutic process is going, and I think that's really important.
Yes, and we've often talked, or I've often talked on the podcast, about the intrapsychic process, that process of what was going on with us, where we are in the here and now. And that is just so important for a practicing therapist to be understand their own internal music, if you like, because they can then make a decision about what kind of volume knob they're going to use to turn it down, because they're there for the person, they're there for the client. And sometimes our lives can be very noisy. So I use the term turning down, like the volume of a radio.
Yeah. And Rory, that sort of brings us on to another reason for a check-in, because a check-in is a way of us just making sure that we're fit for practice. That idea that before you go into a session, or when you're deciding about how you want to be, then we need to make sure that background noise is gone. Is that actually this is a time for me to be with somebody else, for me to be collaboratively looking at whatever they bring. So this idea of good practice, of being even self-care to some extent. Am I fit for practice? Can I go into this session now and give my best that I can?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just so important, and I think it's really interesting that how check-ins change through the arc of training. So, when we do a check-in, maybe at level 2. It can be quite noisy, and there's a slight amount, I think, from the tutor of having to kind of say why we do the check-in, which you've articulated very well, and just to make people aware that not everybody's in the same frame of reference. I think that sometimes, and I can remember this, being really surprised that everybody didn't think the same as I did.
Yeah, and there's a word for that, isn't it? It's called diversity.
Yes.
And there's this idea that actually we can all even think about the same topic and it come from it at completely different angles. And because we're diverse, because actually we're all different in some way, we bring something that is slightly different.
Absolutely. And I also think there's something about when, because there's different forms of check-in, isn't there? And sometimes you can do a one-word check-in. Sometimes people have a fixed amount of time, and maybe we'll cover that as we go through. But I think there's something really useful about understanding where the other is.
Yeah, and I think this idea of different types of check-ins at different levels is key, because when you at level 2, an idea about sharing something that is yourself, you're becoming more self-aware of what's going on with you in that moment, or what's gone on with you in the previous couple of days. That ability to tell somebody else what is actually going on. And I think that's what Rogers was pointing at, is that authenticity, beginning to share a part of yourself.
Yes. And for those of you who are listening and wonder what the historical context of Rogers, Carl Rogers, who kind of pioneered person-centered therapy, were pushed away from the kind of directive, almost medical model of the Freudians, who kind of talked at the clients, for want of a better word, not listened to them, and also stayed away from any kind of relationship. And I think that's really important. I think there's one other really important part of check-in, and that is so the tutor can take a view on if there's someone in the group who may be very wobbly.
Yeah. Actually, another reason for check-ins is I don't know how the listeners are with group therapy or group work, but Yalom, he uses this idea of when people check in, they do 2 rounds of check-in. The first round is the hello, I'm feeling such and such. And the second round of check-in is actually setting the agenda, what they want to get out of the session in that group work. And this idea that once that has been done, once those 2 rounds have been done, the tutor or the facilitator in group work has a real good sense of what is happening in the group, of what people's expectations are, of how he can facilitate. And I think from a tutor's point of view, that is gold dust, to understand that actually somebody might be going through a difficult period at the moment, that they're a bit more sensitive emotionally, is key to holding that particular group.
Absolutely, because fractures within groups usually, in my experience, are where people are not understanding of the other. They're not seeing the other person's frame of reference, and the check-in really sets the bar, really, because everybody knows exactly where everybody is, and hopefully that kind of feeds into sensitivity and thoughtfulness, which are kind of core principles of being a therapist.
Yeah, it is. A check-in is so important. It's about understanding the difference between yourself and another, and that comes through with, as you've spoken about, with diversity. It comes through with understanding other people's point of view. It's essential for building relationship, for sure.
Absolutely, and I think that's a wonderful time to check out, Ray. What a beautiful journey through a check-in. So if anybody's out there listening, wonder why we do a check-in, then that's the reason.
Yeah. No, great. Rory, so nice to speak with you as usual. I hope to speak soon.
Yeah, you too, Ray.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Yes, so the mystery of the check-in revealed.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And certainly Ray gave a very concise overview on why we check in, and sometimes some classes check out. You can check in, and then right at the end, a tutor may say, "Okay, we just get a one feeling check out." Just the group just goes round, and each individual gives a one feeling check out. But yeah, super interesting, and of course, it keys into what we're always keen on in counselling, and that is protection. Making sure that self is protected when we're doing work that can be, it can be taxing, it can be demanding emotionally. So self-care is a premium, and the check-in really helps with that.
And I love that check-in with CPCAB. And that's, I guess, why it's called Check-In with CPCAB. It's so important. It really is a check-in. I remember how strange that felt for me when I was on my counselling course and checked in for the first time. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But it became second nature towards the end of my study. And interestingly enough, it is something that has stuck with me. I kind of check in with myself each day. Where am I at? What's going on for me? Where are my feelings? What do I feel? Do I feel any level of anxiety? Looking at self is such a gift, and it's rare. It is so rare. And it is thanks to my counseling training that I found myself. So check-ins. Definitely can't recommend them enough, even if it's just with self. And of course, if you would like to pose a question to CPCAB or suggest a topic, then you can do so by going to the Counselling Tutor Facebook page. And where do you find that? Well, you just go to Facebook and you put in the words Counselling Tutor. We got a special group there, and we've got, last count was well over 20,000 like-minded professionals, qualified counsellors, students of counselling, tutors, supervisors. We all hang out there, even people that just use counselling skills in their day-to-day work and not necessarily counsellors. All are welcome, and we speak about all things counselling. And of course, you can ask direct questions to CPCAB right there from within our Facebook group. They look at that. We correspond with them regularly, and the topics for the podcast are taken from there. So please join those conversations. So we're now moving from the check-in to the difference between using skills in a classroom and using skills in practice.
Yes. One of the things that I used to wryly smile about when I taught was level 4 learners who are going out into practice, and they become very polished and very, very adept at using counselling skills in the classroom. And there's an old military term that says no plan survives contact with the enemy. And I'm not saying that our clients are the enemy, but what it does say is that you can prepare, but when you put it into practice, what happens is it doesn't always go to plan.
Yep.
And when people come back out of their placements, they go, "It was terrible. The client wouldn't stop talking, and I couldn't get any of my skills in," or I was using my skills and they weren't working, or the client didn't say anything. It was just one long silence, or the client was very sad and crying, and I couldn't. And the thing is that in the classroom, you're with like-minded people who know the rules of the game, because you're all taught about, time boundaries. You're all taught about how to listen, and that permeates into everybody. So there's a kind of respect. People respect each other, hopefully, and they make the journey of using counselling skills quite easy, because that everybody looks at the clock to see if the time's up, so that people don't go over. That doesn't happen in the real world, and also clients are bringing. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen in groups, in training groups, but clients are bringing really raw and edited material, and sometimes we have to adapt our skills. We may not be able to use all of our skills in one session, or we may have to rely just on one skill, and that could be just a skill of silence, skill of listening, allowing the client to speak. So it can be a bit of a steep learning curve.
Yeah, and there's one thing that we do during our counselling training, and that is an observed skills session or recorded skills session, which is evaluated, where it's listened to make sure that we're using the skills appropriately. And within those sessions, we're kind of encouraged to use as a range of skills within that session, and you can find yourself going, right, I've got to slot in a bit of silence here, and I've got to put in a reflection, I've got to put in a paraphrase, I better put in a focus, and it's understandable. You're being assessed on that, and they need to see that you're using the skills. However, you're 100% right, Rory. You go into the real world, and you can maybe come out of a session having used little, what may be perceived as little to no skills. You can specifically, it's pretty common with first sessions with a client, where the client comes in and they will kind of bring lots and lots of material. It's sometimes you need to take a breather just to contract with them, saying, well, I hear that you have a lot to bring, but I just need to go through this contract. And then when you finish the contract, it's like the floodgates have opened. And this is fully understandable. Here's a person who has bottled something up inside them for so long. They've had nobody that they could trust to speak about it. And now they have this outlet, and they want to bring it all. They want to bring the whole story so that you can understand where they're at. But it leaves little room to put in your reflection, your paraphrasing, your summarizing, because sometimes the client hardly takes a breath in between bringing the next part. And within that real situation, it is 100% okay to just be there and receive that person and to engage in active listening, to truly understand where they're at and let them know that you're hearing them. And that is all that's required. That is all that's required.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting, this isn't something that just affects students. You know, I speak to a lot of qualified practitioners, and they say the same, that sometimes, you know, they feel that they're not using enough skills, or they're not using enough reflection and paraphrase. And I think sometimes that people can get hooked up in skills as opposed to listening to understand and being what I would call precise in how you use the skills. The skills are like a little toolbox of communication. And, you know, for some jobs, you only need one spanner, quite frankly.
Yep.
You know? And it's the same when you're working with clients. Someone recently asked me, how often do I summarize? And it caught me on the hop a bit. And I thought, actually, I don't summarize a right lot in my practice. Mainly because the clients do that for themselves. You know, I've noticed that at the end, clients will sometimes say, well, you know, in this session, I've kind of come to this conclusion, and maybe I need to do that. Well, that's them summarizing. I don't need to kind of just repeat that. You know, they're self-affirming. So I think all those skills are really useful. They have to be used sparingly. And I've recently done a lecture on the use of counselling skills. And one of the things that people struggle with is that they try and leverage in too many. They try and leverage them all in. And, you know, you don't need to use that many tools. Sometimes just one or two thoughtfully used can get really, really good results for the client, and the client can feel heard.
Yeah, that lecture that Rory is referring to there, if you want to listen to that, you need to be a member of our paid for resources, the Counselling Study resource, absolutely packed with lectures. And there's a whole skills section in there. And you've just done a skills toolbox lecture in there, Rory, where you've spoken about a whole different range of skills there. There's also a lecture in there of mapping your skills to the theory. There's really so much value in our Counselling Study resource. So if you're a member, log in, go to the lecture section, click on skills, and that is all there for you. If you're not a member of the Counselling Study resource and you'd like to check that out, just go to our website, counsellingtutor.com. Right there on the homepage, all the information you need is there. But I also have a free resource for you. What if I could say, Rory, you tell me if this is valuable, a free resource where you can get the following topics: basic counselling skills overview, and then the following skills described: attending, challenge, empathy, focus, immediacy, questioning, rapport, reflecting and paraphrasing, taking it down a level into relational depth, using silence, summarizing, taking a look at the therapeutic relationship, and a little bit more info on unconditional positive regard. What if I was to say you can have all of that for free? Would you be impressed, Rory?
I would be stunned. Yeah.
Well, it's all free. All you need to do is go to counsellingtutor.com, look across the top menu bar, and you'll see there is a drop down for skills. And all of those skills are written up in depth with downloads that you can get from those pages as well. So counsellingtutor.com is an authority site on all things counselling and psychotherapy. I have to say that it is overseen by Rory. You are our academic director, Rory, so he kind of makes sure that academically it is sound. But we also use an academic writing team that write this up for you. So their job is to research and find this information for you. And I think that this is worth revisiting no matter where you are in your counselling journey. If you're studying skills, then you need to learn this stuff because you've got to write about it in your assignments. But I think it's just as important, if not more important, for the qualified practitioner who's been out and about for a few years. Brush up on those skills because they are our tool for kind of engaging with our clients in the therapy room. And what can happen is we get a few favorite tools that they're our go-to, you know. And I don't know who it was that said that if what was it about the hammer? If you see, go on, Rory.
It's Abraham Maslow. He said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail.
Yeah, and we don't want to go there with our skills. You know, there are a breadth of skills. There are a lot. When last did you look at attending, empathy, focusing, immediacy, questioning, rapport, relational depth, silence, summarizing, therapeutic relationship, unconditional positive regard. Go to Counselling Tutor and go and brush upon that, all free. CounsellingTutor.com, skills tab. And of course, today's episode, you can get all the downloads and the show notes for that. Same place, CounsellingTutor.com. Click on the podcast tab and go to episode 122. It's all there for you.
Yeah, well, what a great episode. We started off by talking about the difference between using counselling skills and other helping activities, how they differ and what challenges may lie ahead. We had Ray, who talked about why do we check in, and talked about all our essential ingredients in counselling, which is self-protection and making sure those around us, we're aware of those around us. And finally, we talked about the difference between using skills in the classroom and using them in the real world. And in fact, we kind of extended that to considering what skills we should use. It's a great episode. I hope you've liked it. And hey, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.